School already beginning, of course, for some students, while others are just days away now. Yet some medical experts say some questions remain on the safe return to the classroom. Let's bring in University of Ottawa epidemiologist Dr. Raywat Deonandan. Good morning, Dr. Ray. It's always good to see you. Thanks for your time.
Morning.
So you have submitted a list of questions, I understand, to the province's top doc, Dr. Williams. Do you have some outstanding issues as back to school begins?
There are a lot of outstanding issues. Number one, of course, is why aren't the class sizes smaller? That's what every expert has been advising, and yet most provinces have been slow to act on that bit of advice. And there's a lot of buck passing. You know, it's not their responsibility; it's the Ministry of Education's responsibility. But as an epidemiologist, one of my most pressing questions is: what are the metrics for deciding when to change direction, when to close down the schools, when maybe to rethink the plans? So there's a lot of uncertainty and a lack of transparency in some of this.
So as someone who is on the front lines, but also a specialist when it comes to these things, what is the perfect number when we should say, hey, A, quarantine the entire classroom, and B, the entire school?
There is no perfect number. I mean, I think if there's two cases that are probably unrelated, that's an outbreak, and that should be a situation for deep investigation. A single case is a situation for, some concern. But I don't know what the threshold should be for school closures. I just hope that there is some talk about what that should be, or range at least. And I've seen no indication of that discussion happening.
You're worried we're flying by the seat of our pants and that it might be actually not only mixed messages, but information that's good for one school but not for the other, depending on who's making that decision?
That's a good point. I think there has to be a centralized set of thresholds, but also there has to be something resembling a regional approach. So what's relevant for a low prevalence environment may not be relevant for a high prevalence environment or a high density environment. So it's important to have that diversity of approach on the table. But again, there has to be centralized leadership and some degree of crystallization of vision that I've yet to be seen written down in a clear way.
I want you to weigh in on what Dr. Virechis told us yesterday. Two things. She said, A, that there are already school-age kids in our community testing positive for COVID-19, and B, she expects potentially in the first week an outbreak, as you described it there. So when the symptoms are shown, parents are supposed to keep their kids at home. Should they automatically go and get tested? And is it up to them, or should it be mandatory just to protect the rest of us?
Well, when symptoms are shown, that isn't necessarily an indication that one should get tested. I think you should monitor the person more thoroughly. And if other people in the household start showing symptoms, then yeah, the entire household should probably get tested. If we had more testing capacity, I would say absolutely saturate, test anyone involved. But my sense is that there isn't that capacity and there's a rush on the testing centers. That's probably why that hesitation to advise overall testing. I'm hoping that when the rapid at-home testing arrives, as it seems that there's a lot of press on to make that happen, then that would be a no-brainer. We have to get tested all the time. But I'm wary of putting that burden on parents to make that determination all the time, because as the cold and flu season unrolls, we're going to have these symptoms that are very similar to COVID that are actually the cold or possibly the flu. And we may be overestimating the need to keep some kids at home, or keeping kids at home too long, or maybe fomenting some degree of panic. So I expect some chaos in the first couple of weeks of reopening.
Let's talk about negligence. People who test positive for COVID-19 or get tested. Let's talk first about that group. And they are awaiting their results. Obviously, they went there because they suspect they may have it, and yet they're not self-isolating. Fines apparently aren't working for some. It's those who have a disregard for, I guess, the rules. So there were calls now that maybe we should look at potential criminal charges. Is that going too far? Do you think it might be necessary if people aren't following the rules and endangering the rest of us?
If we get to the point where the numbers are climbing steeply and we cannot control it, then yeah, I think it may require that kind of step. Because what's at risk here is the open economy. And if the economy shuts down, everyone suffers unbearably again. So it may come to that, unfortunately. I'm loath to recommend it. In a liberal society, that's a heavy hand. But if people bring that upon themselves, they have no one else to blame but themselves.
Speaking about the economy, restaurant sector saying they've got like 90 days left before, of course, the patio season ends. They're worried they're not going to be able to survive once the patios are closed because people won't want to go indoors. Let me ask you from a medical perspective, if somebody's sitting at home and loves the patio but says, I don't want to go in, do they have to worry? Is it more risky to be inside a restaurant eating? And how much of a risk more if there is one there?
It is more risky to be inside. I think Bonnie Henry estimated that inside is 17 times more risky than outside. I'm not sure where she gets that number from, but why not? Let's go with that number. So I don't blame people for not wanting to go inside. I personally don't go inside restaurants. I think restaurants should really consider remodeling their business plan to focus more on delivery and takeout. I know that's easy for me to say and hard to implement, but there has to be some creativity and flexibility in the system if we're going to weather the storm for the next few months.
And yet the measures spelled out by Ontario's top doc say it is safe to go in there. So you've got the restaurant owners hearing that we're doing everything that the province is telling us, and now they're hearing you this morning saying it's not enough.
I'm not saying it's unsafe. I'm saying I personally wouldn't do it. And if the goal here is to drive the community load as low as possible, then I feel we should do everything we can to keep that number low, to keep the schools open, to keep the greater economy open. And if that means avoiding every unnecessary need or desire to go indoors if we don't have to, then that's what it takes. So a restaurant, frankly, is a luxury for most people. It's not a necessity. For a handful of people, it will be a necessity. And for those people, absolutely, I understand you have to go inside. And because the numbers are smaller, then we can have better spacing and so forth. But again, the risk does increase. The baseline risk is small to begin with. So a 17 times higher risk above a low baseline is still a low risk, but it's still higher.
Dr. Raywat Deonandan, epidemiologist, U of O. Thank you, sir. Appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.